Welcome back, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are here to talk about the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Now, first thing, before we get too far, very important to remember that Paris is apparently the best city ever to make peace. Lots of examples in history of peace treaties signed in Paris. And if you don't sign it in Paris, maybe you can sign it in Versailles, which is just outside of, you guessed it, Paris. But anyway, excuse me. But anyway, with that, Treaty of Paris of 1763. I don't usually care about the dates of things in this class, but you need to know 1763 for this Treaty of Paris. I'm very sorry, as a teacher, that there's going to be two treaties of Paris that we need to know about, 1763, 1783, and you need to know the difference. So the first one we talk about is Treaty of Paris of 1763. It's going to end the French and Indian War, okay? You don't need to write this down. I'll have it highlighted. This is just, I thought, a really good graphic to sum it up a little bit. Excuse me. But this is the big takeaways, and then we'll look at what you need to write, and then we'll look at a map, I think, at the end, actually. But it ended the French and Indian War. The French are going to get the boot out of North America. They gone. And it's going to give a bunch of land to Britain and Spain. We'll talk about why that would be. And the American colonists aren't going to receive a whole lot, but they are going to be taxed more. Now, I would debate the idea of whether they received a lot or not, based on the fact that their boogeyman, the person or the group of people they were most afraid of, is now gone, but more on that later. Okay, so first thing you need to know about the Treaty of Paris of 1763. Okay, obviously ended the French and Indian War. That's going to be the most important thing about it when you're on Jeopardy later and they say, what ended the French and Indian War? And you'll say, what is the Treaty of Paris of 1763? There you go. You're welcome. Thank Mr. Gone. Okay, verbally, we'll talk about it. France loses Canada to Britain and gifts Louisiana to Spain. Okay. The colonists, one second, let me check something real quick. Okay, cool. The colonists no longer have to worry about the threat of the French attacks, and Britain is in a huge amount of debt, which is actually really important, but I think I have you write it later, which is why it's not written here. So the 7 Years' War, aka the French and Indian War, goes terribly for France. France sides with this country called Austria against this country called Prussia, and then against Britain, which we've obviously talked about. Remember, the French strategy is win in Europe, and then we can trade back land in Europe for our colonies that we kind of said to our colonies, okay, fend for yourself, good luck. We can't compete with the British Navy, so we'll try and trade for you after. So there's a whole big conflict in Europe. The French don't do as well as they need to in Europe either. So they lose ground in Europe. France doesn't like get invaded or anything, but they do fail to invade anyone else. So it's kind of like a draw in Europe. It's like a tie. But that's as bad as a loss for France because they lose ground in India. They get Caribbean islands taken over. They got Canada taken over. Okay? So what ends up happening is they go to negotiate. They sit down at the Treaty of Paris, and the French are given the option. You can either get your Caribbean islands back, or you can get Canada back. Now, in hindsight, we'd say, well, keep Canada. Of course you keep Canada. But what ends up happening is if you're the French, it costs a lot of money to run Canada. We talked about how the French Empire was so spread out. It was so big and spread out. So it costs a lot of money to send the money, the people, the supplies to those areas, those far-flung areas. And in return, you get furs, which do make you money. But in the Caribbean, you can run an island, which is pretty cheap for the government, pretty easy to manage, and the islands are growing and selling sugar and coffee, which are much better commodities to sell than furs. You're going to make more money that way. And so there's a famous French philosopher named Voltaire, and he said, what is it to give up a few acres of snow? That's what he calls Canada, a few acres of snow. Those 60,000 French people are not excited about that, though. They don't want to be British. Louisiana is much bigger then than it is now. Let me see if I can get my map real quick. So Louisiana is this big yellow territory here. And what had happened in this war, remember I said it was France and Austria versus Prussia and Britain. The entire war, France is begging Spain to help. France is like, hey, Spain, can you please help? Hey, Spain, can you please help? And finally, in 1762, which is only 1 year after or before the war actually ends, Spain finally says, yeah, okay, we'll help. But if you want us to help, you're going to have to sweeten the deal. So even though France loses the war, in order to get Spain to help them, they still had to give away all this territory. Okay, this is modern states of Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, all the way into like Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa. It's just a huge amount of territory. It's mind-boggling how much territory this is. And they gave it to Spain to try and get help in the war, and that ended up not really mattering. Okay, anything over here? No. You have, let me just X that out. You have the French give up. This was Canada, right? They gave that up. The Spanish do give Florida to Britain. So basically, we'll use red because that's usually Britain's color on maps. So Britain now controls basically half of the North American continent. So they control everything to the east of the Mississippi River. But we'll talk about this in a second. They don't let, or maybe we'll talk about a different lesson, I don't remember. They don't let colonists go beyond this line. So if you're one of those 2 million American colonists, you actually aren't allowed in here. Now remember, to them this war started over the ORV. That's the whole reason we did this if you're a colonist. That's what you're talking about, is this ORV, and now you're telling me I can't settle there. More on that later. Okay, back to stuff we need to write. I'm going to talk through 3 effects of the war. So the first one, excuse me, the British have a huge debt. It costs a lot of money to run a navy and send your soldiers all around the world. It costs a lot of money to finance foreign armies to fight the French, which was the other thing they were doing. So the British are like a massive bank almost. They have the most advanced banking in Europe, and that's how they're used by their allies. And that's a good thing for Britain, actually, because you can send your dudes to go do other things that are better for you. But they're in massive debt. Okay, there's a big line of debt all throughout Europe that leads back to Britain. So their response, the British look at this situation and they say, the people who benefited most are the American colonists. They were afraid of that French boogeyman in Canada. Well, guess what? The French are gone. Okay? We also are now making relationships with the Native Americans so that they won't attack the colonists. So it's time for you guys to pay. Colonists hadn't been paying. We'll talk about that in a separate lesson. What had been going on with the colonies for 100 years. They really hadn't been paying very many taxes at all. Okay? At least not to the British government. Excuse me. All right, second thing. Britain now has the Ohio River Valley, and they do move soldiers in there. Okay? So Britain has the Ohio River Valley, which was a goal. That was a war aim to start with. They move soldiers in there into the old French forts. Okay, they renamed Fort Duquesne Fort Pitt, and there's a town around it, and they call that Pittsburgh. They move into what's now Ohio and Indiana and Michigan. And they occupy the old forts, the old trading posts. Settlers do come. They aren't really supposed to, but they do come at first. Okay, we'll talk about why they stop coming. Third effect is this thing called Pontiac's War, and this is why the settlers stop coming. It's because a lot of them die. Basically, there's a big meeting of chiefs led by an Ottawa chief called Pontiac. And he's from around the Great Lakes region, Michigan or Wisconsin, somewhere around there. And they get together with chiefs from Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Ohio, and they say basically, wait a minute, these British guys are coming in. The British traders were charging much higher prices for European stuff. They were trash talking our old friends, the French, and they're letting settlers in here. Too many of them all at once. So the chiefs get together and they say, basically, we are going to launch a surprise attack on the British. And they launch a big surprise attack all at once. Okay, they know how to get around the Midwest a lot better, get around the forests. They know how to ambush the British. They attack their forts, they attack their trading posts, they attack a lot of the settlers. A ton of soldiers die, and a ton of settlers die in this first big attack. The British move more army in, and because it's the end of the 7 Years' War, aka the French and Indian War, they negotiate a peace. They don't want to go to a whole big war with Pontiac and his Native American allies, because they're like, hey, we just got done with fighting a war for 7 years. We're exhausted, really 9 years. We're exhausted. So, we'll sell you some cheaper stuff and we'll stop the colonists from coming in here. Because again, the Native Americans don't like the colonists flooding in. When the colonists come in, they change the environment. They cut down the forests to build farms. That affects the Native American hunting grounds. Native Americans do agriculture, but they do it in a different style, that slash and burn agriculture, where you do the agriculture, then you kind of let the forest reclaim it and do it somewhere else, then you kind of cycle through. When the colonists come in, they clear out the land, they destroy the habitat for the animals, and then they a lot of times try and push the Native Americans out. But if you're a colonist, this is really going to upset you. Proclamation of 1763 says you can't move past the Appalachian Mountains. It's too dangerous. You can't go there. The other thing, to enforce this, the British are going to send more troops. Okay, they're going to send more troops. And those soldiers, a lot of them, are never actually going to make it to the Appalachian Mountains to enforce this. A lot of them are going to chill in cities like Boston. That's going to cause a lot of issues. So let me see from my old notes. These are the old notes. It's Miss Whistle's handwriting, not mine. This is just like a quick recap. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, I think we're good. So with that, big takeaways. Treaty of Paris, end of the war. The French are gone. French are booted, entirely gone off the continent. The British control everything to the east of the Mississippi River. This is all British now. But if you're one of the 13 colonists, you're not supposed to pass the Proclamation of 1763 line. Okay, so the colonists gained safety but not territory. The British gained territory but lost money. Let's see how that works out for everybody, right? When you ask these colonists who think they didn't gain anything, you say, all right, you're welcome. Time to start paying. I wonder if they'll get angry. I don't know. We'll find out next time. Let me end this. I said that way too early.